I would have no issue conditioning that.
We might even say this has to be done before any other work is done.
Yeah, it sounds like you were at our last meeting. I feel like we had.
Yeah, we did something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done it before where we put, prior to the start of work, these things have to be in place to deal with it. We're talking about one of the order. Did we issue it last time? There was one that we did.
I don't think we issued.
That was up there. They can appeal the DEP or notice of intent, but they can't. They have to appeal your enforcement order to the Superior Court, even if it's just on the weather suppression. Yeah. So that's the only thing
Oh, you'd be tied up for forever. So, at least you meet your statutory requirement.
No, but what I'm saying is you could possibly hurt yourself because you tie that all into the order that's appealable to the DEP. You preclude yourself from getting it upheld by the Superior Court. Because you brought it in.
Maybe.
That's just a real slight chance of downside, but it's good to know. I'm glad to know that that'd be what I was thinking of telling you to do.
I mean, I usually reference, like, if we've already issued the enforcement, as I'll document that as a finding, that there's an enforcement for X, Y, and Z that's in there, and then just condition it to remedy as a part of the project. Then when it appeals, it's great that you put the enforcement as part of the findings. And I don't think DEP would overturn your decision saying they had to remedy the violation. At least I would hope they would. They've done crazier.
Yeah, especially if it's like we didn't give a number because of the
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, I would definitely talk to the DEP guy about maybe doing that. I'm sure our guy, Mark, would probably say this to do it that way.
Sure, it's always freezing.
Yeah, I'm trying on my bike and thought, it's warm enough to ride my bike, but I'm going to have to be sitting in that room.
Exactly.
I think you can sit wherever. Well,
Except for Ian, that's
Ian. With the phone.
Pick anywhere around your sign and I can't sit anywhere.
I'll sit. Do I have enough?
Oh, you're the other end.
Where am I?
That right there. Wait. The last one you didn't touch.
Yeah, no, I see this, but do we have enough seats? We have
3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's enough if Jeff shoves down one.
Or there may be something that I at least talk to DEP in advance. And say, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing. Are you guys okay?
Yeah, I think he's given Ian. That's the only seat that Jeff assigned was the middle one.
No, right here is good.
It's hard to see the screen from the middle.
That's true. That's it. I hadn't even thought of that, but there you go.
I guess that's the reason I should have my computer open, but I might as well just look at the screen.
How you doing? Good.
Are there, oh God, are there plugs in this room?
If you have an extension cord.
Yeah, right.
What's wrong with this?
That would not be the first time that I would have run into.
You said it as I
I'm gonna
thought.
sneak upstairs.
It looks like you have one behind you, Ben, on the floor.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm gonna need power at some point too, which is probably why I should keep this closed.
No, you're good.
Absolutely necessary.
I'm okay. Okay.
Next time we'll have a central power strip for all
We're
of
gonna
us.
have to. I mean, if we're gonna be in here for a bit, I don't suspect we're gonna get through this tonight.
Oh, you think?
Wearing coats and sweaters. Desks that you plug in.
They're not.
When you plan on going out here by like 6:30 or something?
Yeah, hopefully. I'm hoping there's just a little bit of light left when I get home.
A little bit.
Which would mean I'd get home around 7.
Oh, yeah.
butterflies that were supposed to hatch today. Oh yeah, I've got to see what's going on in there.
For that time, huh?
Well, I finally had some form pupas in the garden, and they were successful. It's my first year of like actually raised wild monarchs.
I heard a story on NPR about the monarch migration, you know, and apparently down in Mexico, there are 2 species of birds that are adapted to feeding on monarchs.
Okay.
And they just slaughter them. They just eat them like crazy. They're just like bonanza.
All winter, it's like.
Yeah, so a lot of them just get wiped out by
Those birds.
yeah.
It's like the bears feeding on salmon. You know, the salmon make it up so far, and then you're like, do any of you actually make it to rivers?
I wonder if they eat a lot of them that are floating back down the stream, just pick them out and eat the dead ones. You know?
Some. In the summer, I've watched them because there's a live stream. They actually just eat the brains and the reproductive organs. They go for
Really?
the most protein, and they leave
just
most of the
leave the
fish for
rest.
the birds.
Ah,
Because food is so plentiful.
yeah, it's just there's so much there. Huh?
Yeah.
Nature's not as economical as we think, you know.
Well, it is because there's recyclers down the
Yeah,
line.
there
But
are,
yeah,
yeah,
at the
there
top
are.
of the food chain, there's a lot of waste.
Because we should know that, you know.
Or like the great whites with the seals.
Mhm.
It's like a lot of times they take a few bites and kind of leave them.
Yeah, I always have this big argument with people in Audubon. Why do we want to have more farms? We throw away half the food we grow.
Yeah, we need to restructure the food system,
Yeah.
especially in the U.S.
My story is
Your seeds.
Nice and cold, as usual.
Well, I came from the high school, which has no
worse?
climate. Well,
that
I mean, it was
sweatshirt?
over 90 in my classroom.
Shivering.
Yeah, I'm
There's
freezing.
Nantucket guest in here in Nantucket town, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
Comes up so fast.
What time is stopping this time? What time are you trying to
7.
do? 7
What do we
o'clock.
figure? 4 to 7?
5 after 4?
You think about it?
Yeah.
Here comes our favorite speaker.
Now, if they sound, well, they have a name.
I think only Andy, you and Ian were the only ones who had name tags at a location.
That's what's in front of a phone.
Ian's is in front of the phone, yes.
Phone, yeah.
It's appropriate.
That's where he will be coming from.
It's a comedy and
Oh,
a movie.
so we're all here.
It's just a voice.
Ooh, these are squishy.
I know, these are nice, huh? It's freezing in here.
Yeah.
It keeps you awake.
Second layers.
Hey, Joe, how are you related to the Topham who teaches 3rd grade?
My sister.
Oh, that's your sister. She comes highly recommended, I guess.
Excellent. It's good to hear.
That's,
Mrs. O'Keefe is my other sister.
oh, really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's just a few Tophams floating
There's a
around.
lot of cousins in there as well.
Your mom's
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Dylan was like, I got the teacher I wanted. I got so lucky. I got the teacher I wanted.
You guys started, you made this monster.
No, you made the monster. We fed the monster.
Yeah, let's be clear on that one.
It's like the gremlins. Don't feed them after dark. Oh, good God.
You got about 30 seconds, Andy.
And we're gonna start on time because
Jeff
we're
hasn't sat down.
should have brought
It doesn't look like we're gonna have too many people that we can't hold hearings here.
No.
This affects way fewer lives than that 40B.
Yeah.
Actually, we said 4 to 6:30.
I think then hoping we'd be out by 7.
Did you go out Sunday? Did you go out Sunday?
No. I think Mike did.
I don't know.
We might have gone out early. We went out last week. Rode in. Where did we go? Sanford Farm area, and then that whole land bank property that goes back to Cisco.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Really cool.
Yeah, I did. Yes, I went Surfside and I went all around back in Cisco,
Yeah.
and then came back. And it was fun.
Did you go out like the sewer beds kind of area?
Yeah.
Did you walk across the beach?
No, I actually went around my home pond just for the miles,
Oh yeah.
but there was a couple areas that I just had to walk.
Right. I mean, a couple hours of it. Super soft.
I was gonna keep going to Cisco, but I had to cook dinner, so I was like, all right, it was fun.
Early tomorrow morning. I'm really liking it. I really love that bike.
Yeah.
It's like
I was like comparing it to my old mountain bike, and I was like, fine day.
no contrast.
Yeah.
You know, those tires are really perfect.
All right. All right, Dave and Joe, you're going to be in charge of the deal.
Did he really call us in?
He's in Detroit, I guess. Just hit the speaker button.
I should have printed that.
And then I talked to him.
The only time I've ever been in Detroit was when I was stuck in the airport.
It's a nice place. Let me steal a piece of candy from Dave.
Yeah, we'll see.
Oh, yeah. We should have shoved some down.
I'm good. You bet.
Should have stopped at me.
Oh. Joe, get on it.
Yankee Stadium, second base.
Joe's watching the
What
game.
you didn't know is there was a prize, Joe.
Hello, Ian.
How are you?
Looks like he's right here.
So,
Thank you. Who is this? Is this Dave?
we'll get started. But,
They ought to have a
some
little,
questions you want
they ought to have a
answers
little video, like
town council.
FaceTime thing.
Ian, can you stream this live from this room?
Just say, we'd like town council
Welcome.
to
We're not
answer
quite
that.
started yet, so I
Then
think
you'll put it
Can
in
you
writing
hear?
before the next meeting, so he's not
Can you hear?
answering it on the spot.
Should be able to stream this.
Okay, good.
Right, so, that way, as he gets on the record, then he's not trying to give any notes.
No.
So,
Yes, organized.
Next time, I'm going to stick in my backpack.
I went from hot death to freezing cold.
nah.
Ashley, you want a sweater?
No, thank you.
No, Ashley wanted my sweater.
Yeah, we should all get a town sweatshirt for this meeting.
Seriously.
Maybe we should get you guys all like
Make
conservation commission like cardigans,
Oh, that would be nice.
We should.
or maybe like the
I
old
just
school,
need a dickie.
We should.
maybe like
Just a dickie.
the old school
My neck
like
is cold.
the old school like button up. Get like a double C on it. That'd be amazing. All
Oh boy.
right, I think whenever you're ready, we
Ready?
Kick
can
it
get it
off.
going.
Okay. Okay, everybody, let's get started here for the Nantucket Conservation Commission special meeting for September 17th, 2018. If you are recording, please let us know.
Can you talk into the mic?
Very good. And if you have cell phones, please put them on silence. I appreciate it. This is being recorded as well.
Oh my God.
You have to lean into it a bit more.
Can't hear? Okay.
Take that curve out.
Yeah, straighten it out.
Straighten it out. Does that help? Still?
There you go.
Okay, sorry for that. Thank you. Okay, so starting with the public meeting, public comment for items not coming up this evening. Please give your name.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, good afternoon. Deanne Atherton from the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And I just have we have a question about the current order of conditions for the temporary project, and we understand that that is not on the agenda for this afternoon, and that the applicant appeared before you on September 5th, and it's been continued for a year, but that there will be discussions of that order. We would like to request that in a future agenda, you do hold discussions, because we would like to go through with you whether or not the applicant is in compliance with the current order. And we're just not sure how to do that. Do we file a written request with you? Or,
Take that?
Well, I would think we could schedule it into one of these special meetings, possibly.
Yeah, I think you guys.
Yeah,
okay, that would be excellent. Is that what we
Right.
will request?
that's
Okay,
a
great.
good point.
Sure.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
And I just have 2 procedural comments for the current agenda, so I'll sit down and I'll make those when it's appropriate before you start. Okay?
Well.
In case anyone else has
before we
public
start-
comment.
okay.
Are they procedural relative to the specific agenda item?
Just procedural in terms of the hearing, in the hearing that's about to commence.
Sure. So I was going to go over some procedural issues right off the start, and maybe that will address
Fantastic.
it, and
Great.
then we'll dive in from there.
Good, thank you.
Okay, great. Is there any other items that are not being heard? Okay. So we're going to start with the public hearing.
All right. I'll start first. So really quickly before we get started, and thanks for everyone for coming. I think the way that we had discussed kind of briefly at our last meeting, just as a business item to set up the hearing. I think the intent of tonight's hearing is to first hear the project presentation from the applicant to get the information on the table for what the project is, what it entails, and get those details there. The commission will then have some questions that they'll ask to go through from there and kind of have a, I don't want to say back and forth, but a little bit of discussion with the applicant to satisfy any initial questions. And then it will be opened up to the public for the public to comment, the public to ask questions. I would remind everyone to please direct all of your comments. One, please get up and use a microphone since this is being broadcast live and then also recorded. And if you shout from your seats, they don't get picked up, and I'll get a million complaints that people couldn't hear. So if you could be sure to use one of the microphones, that would be great. Please give your name. Try to say it clearly so Terry can get it. Make your comment through the chair. And if you have a question, please try to not engage in back and forth with the applicant directly. Please run it through the chair, and the chair will recognize you so there's not a lot of crosstalk or confusion. I think from that point, I think we'll all kind of see where the hearing goes, and then based upon that, set the schedule for any further hearings from there. The chair had asked me to remind everyone to try to keep all comments focused to the jurisdiction of the commission, so the areas of the resource areas are within 100 feet and the impacts to those. Well, we do appreciate people getting up and saying whether they like or dislike projects. Please try to stay focused to the Wetlands Protection Act and try as little as possible to hopefully repeat comments from one person to the other. If you have questions for clarity from comments, please feel free to ask those. But we're going to try to go as efficiently as possible. And I know we've discussed the idea of having meetings specific to topics after the first one. And I think we'll see how that goes through this hearing for if there's areas that need to be focused on more than others. So I think tonight's is just to kind of get the initial feeling, I would say, of the project, and then any initial questions, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully that answered some of the procedural questions that you had. Perfect. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay. And also, written comments are highly appreciated, and that will make sure we have all the facts that you're trying to convey.
Yes. And if I know our hearings are scheduled for Mondays typically for this, if we could get written comments before the meeting, if we could have them like the Wednesday or Thursday before, so they could get on to the website and to commissioners' packs and things, and that way if people have responses to them, we can try to get those information out and keep information moving as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
I think
So-
I covered everything.
Yeah, I think so. Cool. Okay, so let's get started here. Would you like to start the presentation?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so I'm Stephen Cohen, I'm counsel to SBPF, and I'd like to thank you for organizing this special meeting and the future special meetings. I know that you're volunteers and this is an extra amount of your time. I would like to recognize that there are a number of people in the audience who are neighbors and friends from Sconset, and they're here in the fall after Labor Day is a little unusual to see such a turnout from Sconset. I wanted to thank them for coming as well. I think over here we've got Jimmy Feely, who's the construction project manager, and Arca Sparrow, who's the engineer and surveyor. Josh Posner is the president of SBPF. Glenn Wood is counsel with me, and Dwight Dunk and Maria Hartnett are the scientists that will be presenting. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, what I see this as happening today is that we've got a presentation where Maria will go through the expansion of the project, and actually what I should say is really the proposal of the project, because going back to 2013, we had originally proposed a 4,200 linear foot project, and that was tabled while we did the 900 foot emergency project. And so what we're bringing back is actually the original length of the project. I think you might know that the length of the project is essentially determined by where the dune has eroded to the base of the bluff. And so that actually has only changed a little bit since 2013, so the length of the project is substantially similar to the original proposal. So we're at about 2,900 linear feet in addition to what's existing today, a little on the north and a little on the south. And so Maria will present that, and then separately she'll present what we think are some ways that the project can be improved, and those are not necessarily proposals, but they're for consideration for some back and forth to see if you think those are improvements, and of course as we go through we'll figure out the best way to do it. And then the last thing that we'd like to do is if the board wants to either ask questions, we're happy to answer questions, and if the board wants to take comments from the public, of course, that's fine. But we'd like to try to end with getting some feedback from the board on either issues that you'd like to see addressed or questions that you'd like to see answered. And if you want to solicit the same kind of thing from the public, that would be good. Because I think the one fault we really had last time was there was such a running conversation, and we might spend 3 or 4 meetings on a topic and then move on and then come back to it. And I think trying to identify early on and then working with Jeff, we could put out some agendas that say, these kind of topics will tend to be addressed at these meetings. It would let people be more prepared and submit all the same comments for all the same meetings and those kind of things. And I certainly wouldn't want to limit anybody at anything, oh, you missed that meeting, whatever. But if we could try to be organized, I think it would be beneficial, especially on the technical stuff, to let people be prepared. After this meeting, at our next presentation, we're going to bring up a different scientist, Gordon, who you guys will remember from last time, is going to come back. He will talk about the coastal engineering, which is the deep inside why and how of the stuff that Maria's going to cover tonight. She's not going to get into some of the heavy science of it. She knows some of it, but the engineering will be at a separate meeting, so I wanted to just break that up for you today and for your expectations. When I presented before you in 2013, I was wearing some Nantucket Reds pants, and I said, if we don't do something about this, the only thing left from Sconset will be these pants. They don't fit anymore. It's been too long, so we're all getting a little. I'm getting a little bigger, but the Sconset Bluff is not, and I hope that you will find a way to permit a project that is environmentally sensitive and consistent with the state and local bylaws. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dwight Dunk with Epsilon Associates, and I'm a colleague with Maria Hartnett, who you're very familiar with. And we're just going to break it up. I'm going to speak a little bit about the existing conditions out at the project area, and Maria will talk about some more of the nuts and bolts of the proposed project. And just a quick, 10,000 foot summary of the notice of intent. As was mentioned, the existing project is about 900 feet. 1,000 feet. So the proposed project is to extend from the existing system northward about 900 feet, and then also extend southward about 2,000 feet for a total of about 2,900 linear feet of extended project with 4 tiers of geotube, sand-filled geotube covered by the sand template. And what we have in the notice of intent summary is the bluff would be, reconstructed with the sand template, vegetating the bluff where needed to provide that longer-term stabilization of the sand from the root matrix. An updated sand mitigation program, which Marie will talk about as part of the program. Updated monitoring program. There's been ongoing monitoring for the existing project. We've learned a lot from that data. And as with most projects, when you have a long monitoring program, when you start out, you develop the program thinking what's the best data, what's the best frequency of measurements, things like that. And as you go on, you can learn what is truly useful data and what might be superfluous. And then also we'd identify the same failure criteria for the proposed project as the existing. The existing conditions along here, these are some newer photographs from drone surveys, drone video. And the existing conditions, it includes public and privately owned land. The bluff, as we all know, is steep. It's actively eroding, regulated as coastal bank. We call it a bluff. It's the medium to coarse grains beach sand. And really the purpose here is to protect residential buildings, public infrastructure, the bluff walk, and the public infrastructure is the road, the utilities within the road. Also to protect the beach, to make so that the beach remains a useful area for recreation. And the issues here is the pre-1978 homes. Some are threatened, some have been moved, and so that's basically the project purpose, is to protect those existing conditions. The focus of this hearing, this notice of intent, the permit, is to protect the resource areas and the interests of the act protected by those, provided by those resource areas. Out here we have land under ocean. We didn't really identify that because there's no work proposed below mean low water. And then moving inboard, we have coastal beach, coastal bank, which is the bluff, coastal dune, which is, as mentioned, is in the southerly extent and the northerly extent of the project area, and then the land subject to coastal storm flowage, also known as the 100-year flood elevation. These resource areas are identified as providing protection of the interests of the Act and the interests of the bylaw. And the focus here is to have a project that improves the ability of these resource areas to provide those functions and having neutral impacts to the other resource areas. The coastal dune down at the southerly end has migrated a little bit from when the notice of intent was submitted. Current surveys out at the site show that the coastal dune is now at about the project of area of parcel 55, with the coastal bank extending landward from there. So the notice of intent at this point would not include work in the coastal dune. That as that coastal dune has receded along this area here, and as it continues to recede, the project would migrate southward. But the idea is not to be removing the coastal dune at this time. And as presented in the notice of intent, Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program has mapped estimated habitat for rare wetlands wildlife and priority habitat. The vast majority of the project area is outside of estimated habitat. about 350 linear feet of the southerly extent is within the estimated habitat. This area is identified as estimated habitat for piping plovers, least terns. Discussions, our observations, other contractors' observations have not observed nesting in this area in the recent history. The beach, as you can see in some of the photos, is narrow, with the rack line extending, covering much of the beach, so it inhibits the ability of this beach to provide high-quality nesting habitat, maybe foraging, but not great nesting habitat because the nests would get washed away. And the mapping does not reflect the recent erosion rates. And we are coordinating with the appropriate personnel in terms of doing this work. And I think in talking with Maria and other folks on the project team, the bank retreat calculations were a subject of considerable discussion for the existing project. The standard model or calculation is to take the recession rate or erosion rate, whatever term you want to use, times the existing height, times the project length. And using that standard approach for the existing project, we've identified a volume of 12 cubic yards per linear feet per year as the bank retreat in a volume. And this was calculated using the existing retreat distance. We have measurements that have been taken throughout the course of time. We use that in a GIS environment to measure the change of the bank, of the bluff over time. And with that, we have a distance weighted average annual retreat rate of about 2.8 feet per year. And, just going through this table, we have, for 107 to 119, we have 2. For 171 to 85, we have 3.5 feet. When we do the weighted average, we get a 2.8 foot retreat. So when we take that and put it into the calculation, we get a volume or a recession rate in terms of volume of 7.7 cubic yards per linear feet per year being lost off the bluff. When we average that with the proposed project and the existing project, with the weighted averages, we end up getting just shy of 9 cubic yards per linear feet per year being lost off of the bluff. So now that we've talked a bit about the natural conditions, the existing conditions of the natural resource areas, the issue that we're seeing with the loss of sand, the loss of the bluff, the retreat, we come to the built environment aspects of the project. And, we have our existing project in the middle. So we have the southern segment, which is at this scale, it's a little challenge, but the green are pre-1978 homes. The yellow are vacant lots, and black are post-1978 homes. And as you can see, for the southern reach, blue, I'm sorry. And what we have here is for the southern extent of the project, the vast majority of the private parcels are pre-1978 homes. When we get to the northern extent, there is pre-1978 homes, which are subject to the ability to be protected by coastal structures, and then some gap lots of undeveloped land, undeveloped lots to the north. But essentially, this is a project to protect the private properties as well as the roadway, the public infrastructure with the road and the utilities within the road, as well as the bluff walk, which is present along much of this area. And then we started out with a project overview, as a reminder for the project overview. What we have here is the north and south. Here's again the existing project. We have it extending up north about 900 feet, extending south about 2,000 linear feet, comprised of proposed four tiers of sand-filled geotubes. The lower two tubes basically serve as a foundation or anchor tubes. It would be installed below the existing beach grade, and then the upper two tiers are built up, stacked, set back on each other to provide stabilization for the bank, and then that whole system of tubes is covered with sand, as we've called the sand template, and the idea would be to fill that up to the volume of sand that's consistent with the existing order of conditions of the existing project, and then maintain sand to backfill to match the rate of loss on an annual basis. So with that overall project overview, I'll hand it off to Maria to get into some more of the nuts and bolts.
For the record, I'm Maria Hartnett from Epsilon for the applicant. And so Dwight just gave you the overview in terms of lengths. And so now on the next several slides, I have some cross sections to show you so we can go through what you heard before. So again, we have 4 tiers of geotextile tubes proposed. These are each 45 feet in circumference, so it is the exact same size as what was constructed for the existing project. The proposal before you is to set the lowest tier at -3 mean low water. And then each tier will be about 6 or 7 feet high. At each end, we do propose returns, again, similar to the existing project. We are proposing returns. Each of these will be 45-foot circumference tubes. The other thing I want to mention is that we will be providing you with an updated set of plans. When we initially provided the notice of intent to you in January, those were based on the most recent survey from August 2017. There has since been a survey in May of 2018, so we'll be updating those with the most recent survey information. You can actually pick it out here a little bit on this slide. The 2017 survey is shown in black, and the 2018 survey is shown in blue. If I can get the next slide, I can point this out a little bit more. So this slide has 4 representative cross sections. They move from the south to the north, so one's at 63 Baxter, one at 67, up to 85 Baxter, and up to 109 Baxter. Again, all of these show the 4 geotextile tubes. Each one shows we have a scour apron and the anchor tube. Again, that's all identical to the existing project. The only change from the existing project is that we are proposing to install the lowest tier a little deeper. We're proposing, again, to install it at -3 feet mean low water. That's to account a little more for potential scour, so we are proposing that the lowest tube is set a little bit lower this time. The other thing I'll draw your attention to, again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have the 2017 survey line shown in black on all of these cross sections. And then the blue line shows the 2018 survey. This probably won't be surprising to anyone, but as you know, with winter with a lot of storms, there was some erosion between 2017 and 2018. And so what we are proposing is to do some sand backfill behind the geotubes, restore the slope here so that it is back to being a stable slope as it was at the time of the 2017 survey. The last thing I want to take you through on the project overview is to take you through a little bit of the elevations. So the project is designed to provide protection from a 100-year storm, 100 to 200-year storm. The stillwater elevations are from the 2014 FEMA study, and so you can see this. It's a little hard to see on the slide, but it is in the plans. Here's the 100-year stormwater elevation. It's about 7.68 feet on the mean low water datum. When the stormwater when wave run-up is modeled, that goes up to about elevation 16, and then when you add a foot of relative sea level rise, it takes you to about elevation 17. That elevation is just over 3 tubes and indicates the need for a 4th tube so that you can have protection from a 100-year storm. So now that we've talked about the geotubes, I did want to spend a little time talking about the other components of the project. So I'll be going through vegetation monitoring and mitigation. Hopefully all of this will be quite familiar to you. We are trying to do things as consistent with the existing project as possible. So on the vegetation, we are again proposing American beach grass. Many of the lots out there are already planted, so we would just fill it in wherever it's needed. Over time, if needed, we would add the native woody vegetation. There were discussions last time on what the most appropriate types of woody vegetation were, and so this list here does encapsulate where we ended up last time, where I think we removed a certain type of juniper. So this is the same list as what was proposed last time. If we need to, we may add a little smooth veneer of sand to fill the gullies prior to planting. Now that we have a considerable amount of experience planting out there, we have found that adding a little bit of sand really does make a big difference and helps the vegetation to take better and really fulfill its role of stabilizing. One item that we are noting this time is, as before, there has been a concern about bank swallows and whether or not those may be present in certain areas of the project. So overall, for bank swallows, they're not a listed species. Their population is indicated as stable or increasing. We went out there and looking at it. A lot of the project area is not suitable for bank swallows, but we did note an area between 109 and 115. That area has shown up as having swallow cavities. And so we would propose not to vegetate the upper few feet in that area. We would maintain that feature. But elsewhere where there aren't nests or where they're sparse or non-existent, then we would vegetate to the top. Through experience, we have learned that it actually is pretty important to get all the way up to the top of the bluff face stabilized. So where we can, without impacting the swallows, we would like to go ahead and vegetate all the way up to the top to fully stabilize the slope. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a little bit about the construction overview. So these pictures that you see here at the bottom, these are from the current project. And what we are envisioning for the expanded project would be a similar process to what we saw for the current project. So as before, all of our equipment access would occur via Hoyks Hollow, and then the equipment would move south to the project site. The trench would be excavated for the lowest tier. We would start with that, and then we would stockpile the sand on the seaward side. I know there was a lot of questions last time about where stockpiled sand was located, and we ended up staking the high tide line, etc. This time we have applied for a permit to the Army Corps. We do think our stockpiles might extend just a little bit beyond the high tide line. We are going to keep everything landward of the mean high water line, so we don't need a Chapter 91 permit or 401 or things like that, but there may be some work below the high tide line, so we have filed an Army Corps permit application for that. And we would propose that, a similar approach as we did last time, where if needed, we could stake certain jurisdictional lines. The first step, or one of the initial steps of construction, would be to roll out that scour apron and the anchor tube. Then the lowest tier of the geotextile tubes would be placed and filled. There was a question last time about sealing the portholes. So again, a small amount of concrete plugs would be used to seal those portholes. And then each tier would overlap another. You can see that in this picture where you've got one section of geotube and then it overlaps the next one, and then the next one is filled. The adjacent tube is filled. Thank you. Prior to the second tier going in, a bench would be installed on the landward side of the second tier. Again, just building a stable surface for the tubes. We would always have that water source trench out there that is needed to maintain the sand slurry. The second tier geotube would be filled, and then we'd move on to the tier 3 geotubes. Likewise, we'd work our way up to the 4th tier, and then we would work on installing the returns. And with the returns, just as with everything else, we would start at the bottom and work our way up. Once the entire structure has been built, then we would place the sand cover, as you can see in this picture was done for the existing project. Now I want to spend a little time on alternatives. Throughout the project, there has been a thorough assessment of alternatives. There is an alternatives analysis attached to the current project that was also done for the existing project. So what I wanted to note are some of those alternatives that have been implemented at the site. So first, our geotextile tubes. Again, we've had 5 winters. We've been pleased with how the tubes have been performing. They've handled some big storms, and they've done well. We spent a lot of time talking about jute and core. We recognize their value as a short-term solution, but for long-term protection, they aren't recommended due to their lack of durability. And these are some photos of the jute and core taken post-storm in March, and you can see there was slumping of the bluff behind them. Coastal bank terraces are similar, using biodegradable material. Likewise, dewatering, we have tried that at the site. Some potential success at Codfish Park, but we didn't see the results we would hope for in this part of the bluff. Drift fence has also been used. Beach nourishment was proposed, and again, based on concerns for offshore impacts, that proposal was abandoned. And just other ideas, growing breakwater, seawall, marine mattresses, and revetments. So all of those have either been installed and tried, or they've been evaluated in theory. And through that assessment, we've consistently led to the preferred alternative of geotubes. Again, they've provided adequate protection in this high energy environment. We've done a lot of monitoring and mitigation, and do believe we are able to mitigate impacts. And again, we've been pleased with how the geotubes, the current geotubes, have withstood the storms that they've experienced. In the NOI, we do present our wetland resource area impacts. Very similar proposed impacts as what we've seen for the existing project. In terms of constructing the geotubes, there will be permanent impacts to the beach and the bank and land subject to coastal storm flowage. And then for those temporary water source trenches that are needed to make the sand source slurry, there will be some temporary impacts to coastal beach. But after the geotubes are constructed, we'll fill those water source trenches back in, and the beach will be restored. Now that we've described the project, I wanted to take a little time and go into the proposed monitoring and mitigation. And again, this is informed by the 5 years of monitoring that has been done, or close to 5 years of monitoring for the existing project. So we do propose to continue with the aerial survey, the aerial 3D bank monitoring. We submitted a report on that recently for the current project, and we have found that this survey is very useful. It allows us to figure out how much sand is in the sand template, and then working backwards, we can actually calculate how much sand has been contributed. That's not specifically required in the current order of conditions, but we have found it provides a lot of useful information. It also allows us to look at the bluff to the north and south and see how it has done each winter. So we would propose to continue doing that moving forward. For the shoreline surveys, we are proposing those twice a year. That is consistent with Mass DEP guidance. We do propose to collect the data to 0 mean low water and then extrapolate it to -5 mean low water. We talked about this quite a bit at the annual review. This does result in pretty impressive gains in survey efficiency. It cuts the survey time in half. It eliminates any danger to the swimmer out there, and the error was about 1%, so it still gives us quite useful data. And then for bathymetry monitoring, we propose that once a year along each individual transect that is currently monitored. On the monitoring and mitigation, we have done several years of underwater video monitoring to see how the cobble habitat offshore is faring. Based on that, we would recommend that we can now decrease the frequency of that. We've been doing that twice a year, and we would recommend that we change that frequency to once every 3 years. We haven't seen apparent impacts from that, so we do think it is an appropriate time where this could be, the frequency could be decreased. We said, or, in the event that there is a large volume of sand going out there, we could do an extra one just to check, but overall, we think once every 3 years would be sufficient. Drainage system monitoring, we've done that for the catch basin. That's been done for 2 years. We suggest that the town DPW take that over as they do for other catch basins. And the wetland well monitoring, again, we've done that for several years without an adverse impact detected, so we believe that can likewise be discontinued. Sand mitigation. So Dwight took you through the updated sand mitigation calculations. The current mitigation requirement for the existing project was conservative by design and includes 22 cubic yards per linear foot each year. Right now, we've calculated that value. When we look at the larger proposed project, again, it's lower than for the existing project. Again, the existing project is in the area that has been hardest hit by erosion. It's also in an area where the bluff is taller, so there's more volume to contribute. When we expand our view and now look at the proposed project to the north and south, that average annual contribution does come down quite a bit. And so we do feel that 22 cubic yards per linear foot per year is significantly conservative. It's more than double and approaching triple. We do understand the desire to be careful and to make sure that there are not adverse impacts. So we are suggesting a more adaptive program where we keep the 22 as our base required volume, but we use a refill approach. So under this scenario, and this is what we've mentioned at the annual review this spring as well, that 22 cubic yards per linear foot would be placed each fall prior to the start of the winter storm season. As needed throughout the winter, we would push more sand down, and then every spring we would just add back whatever had been taken. This would allow us to always have a substantial mitigation volume out there and available, but would prevent us from just adding 22 on top of 22 on top of 22, especially when we have years when the erosion is a little lighter. So, please. And this slide provides a little more information on that sand mitigation. So we did see in the first couple of years that we were monitoring, we did have quite a bit of sand left over. 2016, we had 15,000 cubic yards left. 2017, we had 17,000 cubic yards left. Last year, of course, was a different story. Last year, there were more storms, and so we only had about 10,000 cubic yards left. Overall, when we are looking at the data, we have found that the mitigation template has been contributing more sand than the unprotected bluff. And so we do think that this refill approach is conservative, but still protective. And I can take you through the numbers. So in this table here, we can quantify how much sand was contributed in the first 4 years of the project. Then we can look at the most recent year, and then we can look at the cumulative 5 years. So in the first 4 years, on average, when we were looking at the bluff erosion to the north and south, they were at about 5.8 cubic yards per linear foot per year. The sand template, or the project as a whole, contributed 15.5. It was quite a bit higher. And a lot of that, we talked about this in the annual review, a lot of it was higher in the first few years because during construction, there were more sand lost from some of those water source trenches. So the first 2 years in particular, there was a lot of sand contributed. But overall, we were at about 15.5. When we look at the most recent year, so we compared our aerial survey from August 2017 to our aerial survey from May 2018, we were looking at the bluff to the north and south, and those came out a little over 17, and the sand template came out at about 20. So in this case, even in a higher erosion year, they came out pretty similar. The sand template may be a little higher, but overall broadly similar. When we look at it overall, when we look at 5 years, just average it out, the unprotected areas are at about 8, and the sand template is about 16.5. So again, looking at all of those numbers, we definitely understand the need to still incorporate some conservatism into the sand mitigation template, but we do think this refill approach allows us to be a little more adaptive while also being sufficiently conservative. And so that's what we are proposing. So failure criteria. I know we spent a lot of time on this when we were reviewing the existing project. I'm not going to read these, but what I will highlight is that we are just proposing that we use the exact same for the existing project. If we want to discuss that a little more at a future meeting, we are more than happy to do so, but our proposal to you is just to take all that hard work that was done before and to incorporate it for the proposed project. Consistency with performance standards. In the notice of intent, we spent, or we did a comprehensive analysis. We went through each of the performance standards. I just wanted to highlight a few of them here. Under the state performance standards, we are building the project under 310 CMR 10.33, which does allow coastal engineering structures to protect pre-1978 buildings. And we do say the project is necessary to prevent storm damage to buildings and infrastructure constructed prior to 1978. And Dwight touched on that a little bit earlier, going through the pre-1978 status of the various homes. Under the bylaw regulations, under Coastal Bank, there is a provision that coastal engineering structures can be permitted to protect structures prior to 78 and public infrastructure. There's the provision that structures that have not been substantially improved. And so we note that the project objectives are to protect Baxter Road and other infrastructure and to preserve pre-1978 homes. And then finally, under Coastal Beach, it's very similar. The Coastal Beach for the bylaw, it's very similar to Coastal Bank. It does allow protection of pre-1978 buildings that have not been substantially improved. And so again, we're noting that we do have many pre-78 structures. We have also requested a waiver from this for any of those structures that may have certain improvements to them. As we move forward to considering the monitoring program for the current project, I just wanted to take a moment and remind us where we are now versus where we were then. 4 or 5 years ago, we were trying to appropriately condition a project, or even 2 or 3 years ago, trying to condition a project without having a lot of data, whereas now we have done over 4 years of monitoring over 5 winters. There's been extensive survey work. We are not seeing harmful impacts. The base of the bluff has been stabilized. Again, the geotubes have done well during some significant storms. We've also been pleased with the face of the bluff and how well the American beach grass has done. We've looked at our shoreline monitoring data, and we're showing that the measured shoreline positions and the rate of shoreline change are similar to historic patterns. From the bluff surveys, we can tell that the sand template is contributing more sand than what the unprotected bluff was. From the underwater video monitoring, we're not seeing adverse impacts there. We do feel that that mitigation volume of 22 is significantly higher than what we've calculated, and so again, that's why we're proposing a refill approach to be a little more adaptive. And we've gone through the independent review process. The independent reviewer concurred that the shoreline monitoring data aren't showing accelerated erosion. We're also seeing that the shoreline is fairly stable over the last few years. And so this concludes the end of our portion of the presentation. I do want to go back to what Jeff touched on and what Stephen touched on. We did think it would be beneficial to have a framework for future meetings. Of course, this is all subject to the commission's input and to how you would like to proceed. What I put up are for the second meeting, we have some suggested topics. We would like our coastal engineer, Gordon Thompson, to come, and he can answer some of the more detailed coastal engineering questions. For example, if there are questions on the specific modeling that was done to determine that the base needs to be at -3 feet, Gordon would be the great person to answer that. Or more questions about exactly how wave run-up was calculated, Gordon could answer that. Likewise, if there are specific questions about sediment transport during storms, etc., or alternatives that may be appropriate for the site. So we thought all of those things could be good topics to touch on at the next meeting when Gordon was here. And then going forward, again, we think it would be very valuable for us if we can collect all the concerns or comments, questions from the commission. That way we can be well prepared to answer those. I put up a few suggested topics, but again, I'd expect that you, through Jeff, would help develop this list of what we should cover at each meeting. The items I put up, as you can see, are proposed monitoring program, sand mitigation, failure criteria, or other items. So that concludes my presentation, and now we are available for questions.
Questions? Commission?
I've got a few. Should I just do all mine at once?
Well, see how it goes.
Okay. Okay. So my first question, Dwight, I believe, stated that this is to protect the beach partially, but from what I know of the current project and what's proposed, there's no mitigation for the actual beach lost where tubes are actually replacing the beach, that the only mitigation is for bluff sediment. Is that correct?
So what Dwight was referring to, you can see it when you look at the plans and the property boundaries. So as you know, the beach is publicly owned. Due to the erosion, the beach is gradually moving landward. As it does so, it's moving into private property. And so if nothing is done over time, the public beach will all move into private property boundaries and be lost. That's what that reference was to.
Okay, so not to like the resource area per se. I'm also wondering where the current bluff walk ends, because you stated that was to be protected too.
That ends, it ends at 67.
And are you guys or private property owners going to extend that, or it will still terminate at 67?
We would be able to maintain it through 67, and Josh, you may be better positioned to answer that or Stephen.
The goal would be to have as much public access as possible, both on the beach and on the bluff walk, but I think that the long-term stability of the bluff is a determining factor. So if it could be reintroduced in the area that was lost, that would be incredible, but I think that's an engineering question it'll take some time to see if that's possible. It's definitely a goal.
Okay. And I think this is probably a question that needs more research. I'm just wondering where on Baxter Road is the road, under imminent threat? Because I know the one section that's really close is currently protected. If we could maybe have a map of like, we're worried about how close it is here, because some areas have, more protection than others.
Sure, we could provide updated distances between the top of bluff and the road.
Okay. I'm also wondering, it was mentioned in recent history that there's no nesting of, some listed bird species. I'm wondering what recent history means.
So Woods Hole Group is out there each spring, and their spring survey does typically coincide with right when the nesting season starts. And they've been doing that for at least 10 years. I mean, these surveys have gone on for over 20. But with Woods Hole Group doing that, they always call Mass Audubon and obtained clearance before doing their survey work. So for at least that time period, there has been no nesting on this portion of the beach.
Okay, so for 10 years. Just again, more clarification on vacant lots and imminent threat of pre-78, post-78 homes. The more details, I think, the better. I'm also wondering about the source for the increase in bank swallow population. just because aerial insectivores tend to be on the decline worldwide. So I'm just wondering, where you got that information, if it was
Got
local.
that from Bob Kennedy, and I can have him provide his source, but he was the author of that text.
Okay. Interesting. And I am also concerned or have a question about the decrease in the underwater surveys from 2 times a year to once every 3 years. That seems extreme to me with a project expansion of this size.
So it's a project expansion, but the volume of sand is similar. And so what we found for several years of doing these is the volume of sand that we're contributing is not significant enough to make a difference, because the concern was related to whether we were covering cobble habitat. And so with a similar volume of sand, even if the lateral area increases, it's still the same volume per linear foot. And so we aren't expecting it to make a larger difference just with it being longer.
Okay. All right. I think these are all my questions pertaining to this. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I'd like to hear more of an argument, or more of your argument for looking for the waiver on our substantially improved statement. So that would be one item I'm looking for.
Okay.
A little more justification on the fourth tube concept once again, especially considering the history of the last storm and what we were looking at, and this relation of this last March storm to the 100-year expectations storm.
Okay.
Also, I'm curious what your intentions are for, say, lots like 79, 81, where because of protection from the tubes, that there is sort of protrusion of that point, and how you're going to deal with that.
Right.
With the structures. I know this is more of an engineering question, I suspect.
Right. Yeah, we would propose, so I'll let Gordon answer more of that, but where there are existing jute and core, all of that would be removed.
Okay.
But yeah, we can talk more about that with the engineer.
That might be it for the moment. Do you have other questions?
Most of what I have is based engineering questions. I'm curious about the increase in depth in what backs that up.
Sure thing. Yep, I'll let Gordon
For
answer
Gordon,
that. It was
yeah.
more modeling. It was based on, pulling wave data and other data and conducting a little more sophisticated modeling, but I'll let Gordon explain that for you much better than I can.
And you had some problems covering the geotube before, after a storm. It was like about a week or a week and a half before you got someone. Now I'm just concerned you're going to have 4,000 feet, and what you're going to do to kind of beef up the system, bringing the other companies in, or how you're going to maintain it.
Good question. Do you want to say anything on that now, Jamie? Or, sorry. Maybe we'll start it today and then might look into that a little more.
Okay.
Hi, Jamie Feely for the record. I had mentioned to you guys last time I spoke in front of you that we bought a D6 dozer this year, and having that machine on island and available exclusively for the use on this project, I think is going to help with us with that response time. Most of the delay this year had to do with access and just water run up relative to the beach, and so there's not a lot we can do about that, but having that machine there and ready to go at our earliest access is going to be a help.
Okay.
So I have a question about the calculation of sand. After the template is washed away during an active storm, is there a factor for sand that would or should be available during the time of an active storm? In other words, the template gets washed off and you have a storm that's lasting 3 to 4 days. So theoretically, a natural bluff would be contributing the whole time.
Yep.
So how is that factored into the mitigation?
It's what we see where during small storms the template is contributing where the unprotected bluff doesn't. that sand that's over contributed during smaller storms, it is available. Either it's offshore or it's migrating onto one of the adjacent beaches and can provide a little bit of a buffer to them during the larger storms. But the calculations themselves are calculated, as the average annual bluff retreat volume, which is consistent with standard practice.
Yeah, so it's interesting though, because this project will always, be sort of a little more seaward than the bluff next to it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So the bluff next to it will have eroded and it'll reach a stasis point, whereas the project will be a little seaward always. So it would seem that it would need to keep contributing what a natural bluff would in a natural event. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, and what we've seen though in the data, so the data shows that overall we're contributing more sand than the natural bluff, and overall the shorelines within and adjacent are within their historic positions. So when we're looking at the big picture, we're seeing that overall things seems to be working as designed. We do understand that it's nearly impossible to mimic nature perfectly, but by over contributing a little during the smaller events, again, when we're looking at the big picture, the shoreline is about where we would expect it to be.
Okay. Ian, do you have any questions?
I was unable to see what was being projected on the screen behind you because it's not coming off on the live feed. So I'm going to reserve my questions until I get to see that as a PDF file and read through this. But I certainly take exception to the statement that it's been replacing the sand overall. This spring, for instance, after the second major storm, there was a noticeable dip in the beach, and there clearly was a lot of sand hadn't been contributed during the storm. And I'd like to discuss that at a greater level next time, at the next meeting.
Okay. Yep, we can be prepared to do that.
Yeah, I have to agree, speaking to Ian's point, and I think Ben's having a very detailed construction protocol for recovering this thing, because I think it was actually like 5 or 6 weeks it was left uncovered this winter. It was at least 4. I have it in my notes from the meetings. It was at least 4 weeks that the front of that template was uncovered. What manpower is going to be necessary, how many days after a storm of XYZ significance it'll take to cover, just a little bit more detail there.
Sure. Yep. I think that's reasonable to set a reasonable expectation. As Jamie said, we do have to have water. We have to wait for the water to recede a little bit. We do have to be able to have equipment access, but I hear your request. I think it's very reasonable to define that.
Maria, I think you're going to need some significant engineering data to really demonstrate that sand that washes offshore during average years in excess is equivalent to the sand that would come offshore during a storm. I mean, we heard testimony during the last hearing that how important that sand eroding off the bank is during storms. And to me, that's probably one of your biggest problems, is your mitigation is just doesn't seem to fit a realistic model to me.
Okay. Can address that a little more with Gordon when he's here. Sure.
Also, there was Mr. Cohen came into one of our meetings, and we did discuss one of the issues with the returns. So definitely I know you guys are considering some redesign on the returns and some concepts. I suspect that's more of an engineering question as well, but we're looking forward to that.
Right.
As well.
Right. want to describe that?
Yeah, so we intend to file essentially immediately for a for work to be done this fall to change the returns, and don't want to hold it up as part of this. So that filing will be coming in shortly.
Okay.
On the northern end where the clay head was.
Just the walkable beach, is that still, that's part of the condition, correct? Maintaining a walkable beach in front of projects.
Yes, that was one of the failure criteria for the current project, and so we proposed to keep all of those as they were listed.
Was there any ever consideration of having a walkable path on the top too? I know there was consideration when we were talking stone.
Yeah, and we do try to keep the ramps in place so that you can walk on top of the sand template. Is that what your question was referring to?
Well, I mean for the average public to be able to get up there.
So like a more gradual ramp?
Well, I mean, I know there was sort of led to believe that at one point when this design was going to be designed so people could walk along the top of the structure. I know when we were talking stone, that was a definite in the plan, but I'm just not sure if this is something that's been considered with this, given the length of this.
Right. We would propose to maintain the same sort of ramp structure. If we need to have a discussion about the angle of those ramps, we'd certainly be open to that. But yeah, the idea would be that the sand template on top is wide enough that you can walk on that, and that there would be ramps provided on the northern and southern ends.
Well, access is such a big issue with so many people, so you'll be hearing it again, I'm sure, from the public.
Definitely.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission? Okay, so I'm going to open this up to the public. Please stick to things concerning our jurisdiction. Try to keep it focused. So do we have any questions from the public? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. With me this evening is Trey Ruthven, a coastal engineer who works for Applied Coastal Research and Engineering. And we have not provided you with written comment as of yet, but we will do so before the next hearing. I think that I wanted to, first of all, just echo something that was suggested at the beginning of the evening, which was that the commission take some time during this public hearing process to just review the existing order of conditions for the current project, just to make an official determination of where they stand, whether that project is in compliance, and I think it would just provide a good review and basis for the commission to be able to consider those conditions as you're moving forward with this hearing, and can keep all of those in mind. Would probably just be helpful for the commission and the public. So I definitely would support that taking place at some point. And then I think that from a regulatory standpoint, the items that we are most concerned with would be the project's compliance, which requires that it protect the interest of the bank and beach as a sediment source. And along with that, the waiver request that's being made, which states that the project will have no adverse impact. And I think that that is sort of the basis for what a lot of your discussions will involve. And for us, it certainly brings up our primary concerns, which involve the nourishment, the mitigation, the timing, and the volume of that, and how it relates to the natural system and what's taking place out there now. I think that, as has already been discussed to some extent, we're concerned about the protocols that have been in place and how they were enacted last winter, and the difficulty that we saw in keeping the bags covered during those successive storm events. And one of the biggest problems there is that we don't have a way of knowing how much sediment the system would have taken if it was available. So when we start to talk about some years overnourishing and maybe some years undernourishing, there's a little bit of guesswork involved there if we don't have a good way for really understanding when it's undernourished by how much. And I'm sort of hoping that during these hearings we'll be able to hear, again, some more details about plans for renourishing during storms, after storms, because I think that that's a really big concern we have, is the ability to do that. And also a big concern is the proposed reduction in the amount of nourishment that's being proposed. But as I said, we will put some of these more in writing to you in the future, and I'll let Trey address some more of the technical aspects as well. Thank you.
Good evening. My name, for the record, again, is Trey Ruthven from Applied Coastal Research and Engineering. I'll save a lot of my detailed questions for writing. It'll make it easier to kind of have those discussions. But the one thing I was kind of hoping to see, and some of the members are new from the last time this came out, but was more of an adaptive strategy to mitigation. I mean, we've seen over the last 5 years that it doesn't actually really work the way we're delivering sand right now. During the storm, within the first few hours when we have water levels up, the front of the bags become exposed, leaving the rest of the sand above it high and dry, and so not able to mitigate. Natural coastal bluff, that's actually when it's starting to contribute sand, is when we have those major storm events and water levels are up. January we had a big storm, so within a few hours that was exposed and no longer giving sediment. March, the entire month, it was exposed and not giving off sediment. So we look at like last year's contributions at somewhere around 20 cubic yards per linear foot, and we look at all the major storms, we missed all of those. We caught the initial aspect of January, and we caught the initial aspect of March, but the rest of that time, none of that mitigation template was giving off sand. So we look at those numbers and we say we're over contributing, but I question that. It wouldn't be very hard to go from 20 to 22, and that's just the average number. Well, do we need 22 across the entire length? That's something we should look at. I would suspect as we get to the southern end that our contribution is lower, and that should be reflected. But when we look at the averages that we're using historic averages, especially down to 2003, and in the northern part, what was it, 97? I think we should look at erosion rates in a historical context over the long period that we have data, but also in the shorter term, because obviously when we started this, you know, the southern part wasn't eroding as significantly. Now it is. So that bank should actually be giving off the sediment contribution that it would be now, as opposed to what it would have been over a long historic period. It's that sand that's needed now that should be going across the entire template to protect the southern and northern areas that are not behind this GEO2 project. So I'm hoping for future discussions about how to mitigate, maybe how to mitigate more appropriately, maybe some redesign thoughts on how that could work, maybe more quickly, maybe even in between storm periods when we don't have to have access to the beach, which we've seen in March is a huge issue. But also when we start talking about adaptive management, we talked about this last time, and my concerns are still the same, is that, you know, we came up with 22. That was considered average at the time, and we can talk about whether it was right or wrong. But whatever number that is that's giving out an annual contribution. So if we set up an annual contribution, some years we're going to build up sand. That's what it's there for. Because when we have years like last year, where we have these successive storms, that's when it's all going to be mobilized and taken away. So if we start going adaptive, we end up with like half that number, is that a year like last year, we don't have the sand available to account for what was happening. So hence the entire system remains starved because we're not actually mitigating for what's happening. So I get very concerned when we start talking about adaptive management, is that we're not actually protecting during those major years. During, you know, quiet years, yes, we're fine, but it's those major years that totally discounts. So when we're talking about a shore protection project to protect the bluff and protect the beach, we need to consider how that whole bluff and beach system works together. We'll provide comments as this goes on, kind of detailing questions and getting into specific numbers and how everyone that looks at them. But those are just kind of my overall thoughts, and I'm hoping that those can be incorporated as we go on, so it's more productive conversations. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Maureen Phillips. I live in Nantucket, and I'm with the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And building upon the prior comments about the proposal to do an adaptive mitigation program, I wanted to point to you to the annual peer review report done by Greg Berman from the Woods Hole Institute, which was part of the original NOI filing this past January. And I went through his report and also the various comments and characterizations of his report in the NOI filed by the SBPF. And one thing that concerned me was that Mr. Berman in his, excuse me, in his letter talking about sand mitigation, he said that the Conservation Commission may want to consider the adaptive mitigation program. However, the program could include a method, and I won't read you all the numbers, but basically he was saying that he thought the 22,000 cubic yards per year, that amount really was important to retain and not just assume that because it wasn't needed in a particular year, therefore the 22,000 number was not something you had to meet each and every year. And in the NOI, the fact that he said that the Conservation Commission may want to consider the adaptive mitigation program was viewed as a quasi recommending that this adaptive mitigation program be approved. And I think that's a mischaracterization of what Mr. Berman said in his report. And there's a number of other pieces as well, and other parts where he made comments which were kind of taken to be recommendations. And I know this is a very technical area, and obviously you are going to spend a lot of time on it, but I wanted to point that out and highlight the importance of looking at that peer review. And I also am going to put together just some comments, comparisons of what he said in that report along with what was put in the NOI, so you kind of see how how the data is being looked at. And obviously there's lots of ways to look at this. If we all knew what the answer was, we'd be doing it. But I think it's really important to look at the scientific basis here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deanne Atherton, Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. I think there are 3 areas that I hope we get more information on. And one is, which you know is sort of most important to us, is that public beach. And I think that many citizens would welcome additional information about how this project is going to maintain the public beach. We had always understood that hard armoring like this tends to degrade and destroy the beach on which it sits. So if that's not the case, we'd like to know that. The second thing is about what are the criteria, and Ashley, you might have talked about this, on what's an emergency. Where specifically is the road threatened? Where is the public infrastructure threatened? I know it is in the area of the Northern Baxter Road, but the town already has plans for alternative access if that should be necessary. That was the whole arrangement 5 years ago. South of Bayberry, it just looks to lay people, to citizens, that the road is not threatened and the public infrastructure is not threatened. So I think that would be important because the way we understand it, that's key to the performance standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Maria Hartnett. I just wanted to make one clarification. So there have been a lot of comments about the sand mitigation program, and I do think that is an important topic, and we did have it on there as something to discuss as a future meeting. But I did want to make it clear, again, when we look at the average annual numbers, even last year where there were significant storms, Again, the unprotected bluff was contributing 17 and the mitigation sand contributed 20. Now I understand there are a lot of questions and we want to have a more detailed discussion of when and how the sand was being contributed, but I do want to point out that over the year, the template did contribute more than the unprotected bluff. Other than that, yeah, I definitely appreciate all the comments about that, and we will look forward to discussing that more with the commission. Thank you.
Other questions? Further questions from the commission? Okay. Well, that's surprising, but I think we're just getting an introduction here, so.
I think we've identified a lot of topics of discussion.
I'm sure it will be.
I want to hear from Gordon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be a lot more discussion when we delve into this particulars. Okay. Well, Ian, did you have any other questions?
I do have a request, especially for those of you, oh, excuse me, Ian, I'm sorry.
So, sorry, I have the mute button on. I'm going to reserve my questions after going over this again for our next session. Thank you, Randy.
No problem. Okay, I'm sorry.
Just, I remember last time getting a lot of pretty technical information, especially when people, including SBPF, brought in consultants. And it would be really nice to have at least summaries of that written as well to refer back to. If so, I could make that request for, really the engineering, the technical, when there's a bunch of numbers thrown at us, without a written summary, it just kind of gets lost.
Maria Hartnett for the record. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying with what gets submitted going forward, you want a written, like an executive summary along with it? Or?
Well, mainly for technical information, because it's one thing to be able to go back through and read through some things, or else to have to go back through the tapes and listen to this whole thing again is,
Sure.
I'd rather have my fingernails pulled out, I think. But,
so is there anything specific from tonight you're referring to?
No,
You're just
not
saying
tonight.
going
No,
forward.
going forward.
If there's technical information presented verbally, you would also like a written summary for the record. Am I?
That's what I would like, yes.
Sure. Sounds very
Yeah, that'd be
reasonable.
helpful. Can I ask a question?
Please.
This is for the commission. It's not a technical question. What does everyone think about trying to schedule specific topics for hearings? That doesn't preclude comment that's not on that topic specifically, I don't think, but for scheduling purposes, to know that if we wanted to try to do the second meeting as, coastal engineering, sediment transport, and try to focus on those, if that would be easier. You can certainly bring topics back, and certainly doesn't stop anyone from, asking a question about something else. I kind of like the idea because then at least when you're preparing, you can really buckle down on those and you're not trying to look at everything. There's a ton of information.
No, I think it's a great idea.
And if that's the case, what would you guys like the second meeting to cover? I just have one comment first is, I know that sometimes people bring in, some kind of expert testimony at a lot of expense to whoever's bringing that person, and to say, well, you're going to have to bring that person back 3 or 4 times to talk about these different things. I think we should just recognize that if somebody brings expert testimony, then we should be able to hear that person go through what they want to talk about, just so we're flexible enough to do that.
Yeah, I don't think you're limited to, I think if you say, meeting 2, we'd like to focus on these, if there was certainly something that came up, I don't think you would ever be denying anyone the ability to comment. But that way, if you were bringing if you had multiple experts on your staff of people, you would know we're going to be talking about this at this one, I should bring this one, and I may not need to bring the other one. That'll be for the other one. Not that happens often.
Yeah. No, I think the scheduling makes total sense, especially if there are people who are looking for specific in the public looking for specific answers to certain questions. Don't want to sit through this whole thing.
I just want to make sure that we cover everything thoroughly, and that you guys get all the information you need for performance standards to cover those in discussions, and that everyone is satisfactorily getting their questions answered.
Right.
And time to be reviewed if there's information that needs to be reviewed. So that's my aim. That's why I asked. So I would say to that, the next hearing that we do have scheduled is for the 1st of October. And then just to run through all of the dates again that we have already kind of scheduled. Don't have to use them all, or we can schedule more. It's the 1st of October, the 22nd of October, the 5th of November, the 19th of November, and then the 3rd of December is what we've booked this space for on Mondays at 4 p.m. for all of those dates. So we're here and available if needed. Again, we can schedule as many as we want, or if we get all the information and review done before those all on, we don't have to use them all. So.
I do have to say, if we're setting specific meetings, it probably would be good to have the one that's reviewing the current NOI come fairly soon.
Like the next meeting.
Yeah, so if we're doing engineering on October 1st, then certainly October 22nd should be the review of current things.
I think we could probably get both of those in. So would you guys be interested then, just from writing it down, and the second meeting being order of conditions review?
Yep.
Yeah. Coastal engineering review for the current proposal. And then cover sediment transport. That seemed to be a big issue tonight. And again, you can carry any of those topics forward. You're not limited. I'm just trying to get it for focus purposes, and that way people can direct their comments to that. And then with that meeting being on the 1st of October, I think we would hope to have comments in by like the 27th of September. So that would be next Thursday. Would be nice, because then people will have the weekend to read it. And if the beach weather's still nice, you can read it at the beach.
Right. Sure.
Again, we still encourage, if people have other comments to issues not related to that, to get those in and in advance as possible, because that will give them the longest time to be reviewed and commented on if other people have comments. So comments earlier is always better.
So Jeff, I think that the three topics you said for next meeting are good. I think that sediment is likely to be meeting, but we can get started with it in addition to compliance and the coastal engineering at the next meeting. The one question or the one request I'd make is that if people think that there are actual non-compliance issues, if they could identify those to you or to us or whatever in advance, so that we could be responsive to them instead of being, asked at the meeting about it and then we don't have that information. I think that would be the most productive way to address it. So I'd encourage people to submit that to me or to you or whoever.
Yeah, if anyone has comments, just please submit them to the office. We'll put them up. There's a web page specific to this filing through our Natural Resources Department page. And then I'm happy to distribute via email to everyone involved. That's fine.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
If you don't have the ability to submit it electronically, you can drop it off to us at 2 Bathing Beach Road, and we can get it scanned in and emailed if that's something that's possible as well.
Do we have an email list for people that want to do emails? Do we have a
Mr. Chairman, one other suggestion for a topic would be the alternative analysis. It just looked to me that kind of a major alternative, a reasonable alternative, is relocation, and it wasn't in there. And we know there are ways that can be done. So I think that that's a very important topic.
Right. Well, she did mention, that was mentioned that alternatives isn't in, I think, was planned for the next meeting, but yeah.
I bumped that one down for the order of conditions review. We'll get to it, though.
We'll get it. Okay. So if there are no more questions. Oh, we got a couple now. Okay.
Bill Charlton, lived in Wisconsin for about 25 years. I lived on Baxter Road for about 20 years, and I've heard all the opposition to this project. But when you really get down to it, if you stop this project, you're going to lose Baxter Road. I've watched the erosion I've watched it in front of me for 20 years. I don't know any of this technical stuff, sand mitigation, but you're gonna lose Baxter Road, period.
Thank you. Lady in the back. Could you please come up to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Joyce Barroway.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a necessity.
It's being recorded.
Loudly than I
I
can
understand
hear.
recordings, though. We have
Joyce Barroway, Coastal Conservancy. I just have a question about when this photograph was taken, if it is within the last quarter.
Maria Hartnett, Epsilon. It was within the last week.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's very recent.
I noticed there seems to be several areas where the erosion starts at the top and coming down. Is there any plan in place for mitigation of that sort of erosion?
Well,
So I think the Commission is familiar with the idea that we try to mitigate this both from erosion of the toe of the bluff and the bank, as well as plantings to deal with wind and rain erosion, as well as drainage to deal with stormwater overflow. So there are essentially 3 ways the banks erode, and we're trying to deal with all of them, and that's all in the NOI, and it's in the existing program as well.
yeah, just for everyone's information, if you go on our webpage, and sometimes it's hard to, if you're kind of looking at the page, but if you look on the left column, it shows the Sconset Bluff project, and everything that we have, everything we see is there. So if you want to see anything that we're looking at, it's on that page. So it's very, very complete, actually. It goes way back.
Yeah. If you do see something that you feel that was submitted that's missing, please let us know, because sometimes they go wandering off of the page, or when they migrated from like the old web page, when they relaunched the new web page, we had to go through and make sure that it was all there. So if you feel you submitted something and you're not seeing it, let us know, and we'll get it back up as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
But we try to put anything up there related to this project and sorted kind of by category. And also, I believe on that page it also covers the previous GeoTube filing from 3 or 4 years ago, and anything that we get, any letter, any pictures, anything that comes in, we try to get up for people to take a look at.
Any other questions? Okay. So, seeing not.
Well, we need a motion to continue.
Yeah. So we're looking for, you'd like to continue?
Yes, please.
Okay.
To it. To
I thought I'd take that
October
chance to see. Yeah, right. Till, I guess till, yeah, till October 1st. So do you have a motion?
No move.
Do we have a second?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I have to go through the roll call.
Roll call.
Can we just do unanimous consent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, shampoo, aye.
Top of my.
Bennett, aye.
Arisman, aye.
Steinauer, aye.
Very good, okay. Very good. So thanks, everybody, for coming out.
We do have some other business to do, so.
We have other
unrelated
business
to
too,
this.
but
Oh, we're not.
Here I am.
Sorry, it's quick.
Yeah.
other business, approval of minutes.
Yeah.
No minutes. So approved,
Can we have some minutes?
Oh, what do you got?
David, at the,
Wait till we get to the next one.
We're gonna finish up really quick. We have one more thing to go over, and then
Yeah.
I'll catch up to you afterwards.
Okay. Monitoring report? Nah.
No,
Is that enforcement?
Enforcement.
Yeah, that's what that looks
Enforcement
like.
action, yeah.
All right, so what's that? We haven't adjourned yet. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we haven't.
Yeah.
So I'll pass the photos around.
Do we need to clear this room?
Right.
If you're gonna have conversations, we still haven't adjourned yet. If you could please step outside, that would be most excellent of you. Thank you. I know the main event is over, but we still have just a touch to finish up. We do other things.
There's only a couple. You guys can share. So I'll pass these around. So we had a report that the property at 36 Liberty Street, which is Marcia Spader property, had drained the pond.
on the property, and cut all the vegetation around the pond that was there, and was actively pumping. Yes, sir.
Interrupt you. I'm going to recuse myself from this because I'm in a putter.
All right. Well, this is all we're covering, Ian. So if you want to go, I won't stop you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Probably have a good trip.
Bye, Ian.
Bye, Ian. All right. So, and then the water from the pond was being drained into the forested wetland.
Sweet.
There. So we went and checked it out today. Joanne went and she took pictures that matched these pictures that were submitted. I think we all know that there was wetland reported directly adjacent to that pond and then discharging into the pond. To say that it was a bit of a, I can't believe what I'm even saying, moment was there. Normally I would submit one of our letters for enforcement out, but I think this one is pretty clear that there's things afoot probably in a resource area and then it discharging into another known resource area that we could just skip to it. But it is, since we had a meeting today, instead of me sending it out, I said I'd just bring it to you guys.
Oh, thank you.
I think the plan of action would be to have her appear before the commission to set a path of action. I think at a minimum we never really got a real delineation for what's going on there and at least figure out what that is and then figure out a strategy to deal with this. But I mean, they clearly did a pretty significant amount of, looks like earth disturbance in the pond. Looks like they may have tried to deepen it or muck it out or do something.
What sort of random excuse for this are we going to get?
I don't know. It's going to be
I mean,
actually
That enough time went by that they could slip through.
nobody can see this property.
Of all
We might
places,
get the delineation
I would have
of it.
thought this
I
would
think
have.
we will.
Exactly. We will now.
Again, when the call came in, one, I was not surprised that the call came in, and then I was like, I can't even believe what I'm hearing. And then we got the pictures, and then we saw it, and I was like, I can't even.
I want to know which neighbor called.
Oh,
I don't think it's a mystery which neighbor
no.
called it.
Yeah, what's she thinking? They're not going to be watching me now.
So,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
so we just need a
Maybe he's in Detroit.
I'll call him a contractor.
So we just need a motion to issue out the enforcement, and then I'll pass it down, and everyone can just sign this page, and I'll issue it out tomorrow.
Shouldn't I issue more?
You have a second?
Yeah, second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
That's it.
Very good.
The you can't make this up category.
That's it for me.
Okay, well, I suppose reports, anybody? No, I don't think so. Very good. And commissioner comments?
This was quicker than I thought. That was
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Oh,
It was very
Thanks,
early.
everyone.
bunch of faces staring.
All
at me.
gone.
I think if Gordon was here, it would have been heavier.
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
I actually really like this idea of trying to break it up into topics. I think that'll be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, it will be.
Actually, can I have? Actually, I'll print them off again. Don't worry. Yeah, if I could just get the pictures back too. These are the ones I
They're nice
distributed to you
color
guys.
prints.
I like to send them copies of the ones that we've used.
Oh, they're different. I thought they were all the same.
No, they're different.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah,
She
it's
can't do
amazing.
anything
I feel like
anymore.
the
When did
process
they do
didn't even
scatter
close a
when you
year
pulled
ago.
up?
So it's like the never ending.
No, I wasn't there, but keep signing it.
Okay, so you don't have any administrative stuff, right?
That was it.
Okay. Okay, I guess we have a motion. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second. All in favor?
All right.
Very good.
All right, we're getting out of here.
I will tell you guys a
That
secret
was
that'll
simple.
make the tape, but I also tried to put always one thing on the end of agendas
guys
like
stuck it
this,
out to the
because
end.
it gives a chance for the crowd to clear out.
Yeah.
Get you guys
Don't worry.
hopefully as much free passage out of here as possible without everyone trying to stop. Not that I lucked out that it was this.
That's a good strategy. That was good. I think this
Yeah,
is
they're
go
just.
on the
Because I'll get enough to be on the way out. You know,
Get it.
we need like a back.
Was that PDF ever sent to us?
I don't.
The presentation?
think
Yeah.
so.
The pictures
No,
that
they just
resembled it,
brought
no.
it. They'll send it in after this though.
Oh, good, because
Because I was like, did I
our
miss
notice of
something?
intent
I
is
know, I'm like,
600
what page
pages.
is that?
So I had asked.
No, they usually just send
I was like, no, I got the right one.
The big one.
the power. Yeah, they'll send the original application, then they'll
Yeah.
send the PowerPoints after they do it. For whatever reason, they don't
I've
ever
already
like to
thrown
send
it away.
the PowerPoint in advance and post. Like there's,
I can
they're
understand
giving
that.
away like state secrets or something. I don't know.
We're all gonna take notes ahead of time.
That's why.
What was here for the original application? For the original tubes, for the tubes of the map. Who was on the
You,
board?
Ernie, and Ian.
You gotta figure
Oh no.
You, Ernie, and Ian.
Bam was on.
Dan was
Yeah.
on the original too.
Yeah.
4 times.
You weren't here for the original, were you here for the original?
No.
No.
We came on
Sarah,
after. So
Sarah
it was
was
you.
on.
Yeah.
And you had what's
Sarah
her
and
name
Mike.
Johnson who left in the middle.
Oh
of it.
yeah, that's yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you,
I thought Bam
Ben
replaced
wasn't
her.
on. No, Ben came in for.
We're all after. It was just you two and
Basically,
Ian.
just the two. Which makes me think. The original application was much bigger.
Yeah, that's why.
I mean, we're talking about videos. And there's no.
I thought you had a PDF.
The whole discussion of flora and fauna.
That's when I was like, why are you like that? Because I was like, what the heck? Like, how did I knock it
All
down?
back up. Well, that gets the impression.
Here we go, guys.
Well, and that's where like
Don't let this.
Because I know they said it's very a little while ago that they were going to.
So,
read that in to this meeting.
Yeah.
writing out Cisco's.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Not a task.
stop.
Really, like it's a paper trail. You need to
True.
Even if he's here, I may have it. Just to go, oh, yeah. So I'm like riding. And I go, oh. And all I see is this on the post. And I go, what is that? It's a fucking chimney.
Oh, right, yeah, Fletch took that building apart.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So I'm riding my mountain bike from Surfside to Cisco. And I go, what the hell is that?
That's the timber frame.
That's
house.
it.
Yeah. So, yeah. Fletch
So
Haig was
are we
taking-
going to have a nice little cozy up to the fireplace? See what Dad's doing there?
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. I was riding my bike yesterday and I go, what the hell is that thing?
All the timber frames.
Yeah.
People don't want them.
I literally could see it from
They
Surfside.
saved the frame, so they
No,
packaged
no, no.
it up.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
awesome.
So what did does anybody Fletch Haig took it apart, right? Or did your dad work on
My
it?
dad did it. Fletch was one of the
Oh, Fletch
subs.
was- okay, gotcha.
So where's the structure going to be put?
Because I just saw
Canada, where the
a couple of
owner
posts
is.
from.
The owner is Canadian. He got $8 million. Someone offered him $8 million for that property, and it was like, okay. They were going to tear down the house, and he said, I love this house. The timber frame, I mean, those are, it's beautiful construction. So it's getting shipped to Canada, and it's getting put back up.
Look at the frame. I was like, oh, it's got
Yeah, I
it's
was.
gorgeous.
That wasn't Snyderman.
That's Snyder's.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's a Benson
Oh,
timber.
God.
Oh,
Snyderman.
I didn't put that in there.
I didn't realize what house
No,
that
it's-
was.
Is there any?
Oh, my
so
God.
sad.
Oh, my God, that house is
There's no,
beautiful.
well,
Have you ever been inside that house?
No, but I'm going to look at the photos
yeah,
because I
the
just
new
saw a couple
house
things.
has
I
to
was
go
like,
back further.
Well,
I can't
we
remember
used to do a
what
trade
the-
with Bob Snyder.
Yeah.
We drove up to it.
Yeah, we'll
They're
around there,
so
no
clean.
problem.
They kind of like,
So,
landscape.
my family cleared
Yeah.
house with you.
Pressure on it. Like,
Amazing.
Yeah.
it's very clean.
Bob's made.
I said, well, it's a beautiful frame. Obviously, say it's a frame. It's fine in the house back there. We thought they were going to go back to Canada. Didn't expect Canada.
Well, when he found out that the new owner wasn't going to keep the house and was going to demo it, I was like, well, that's
Oh, they couldn't
insane.
tear it down.
Yeah, at least Snyderman wanted it.
Yeah, Bob
Well, that's a
Snyder
great
was
thing
a
about
good
the
guy.
post beams. They just
Yeah.
pop out the pins and stack it up. Yeah.
Now, is the original
What's up with the chimney?